Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, this Wednesday morning, to talk about rate card management. We still have a few people trickling in, so this is just your 1-minute warning. Talk to you soon. All right. I know I said a full minute, but we've had a few people jump on in and we are a minute past the top of the hour, so why don't we get started? Hi everyone, lovely to have you. March 3rd. I still can't get over that it's March. I don't know how everyone else is feeling. But what we are talking about today is rate card management within your function point system. This has been actually a really asked for topic recently, just around how we can better utilize the system to actually feature what kind of rates we're looking to charge, and especially with everyone working from home and really getting more into analyzing your data, your financials. It's really important that that core and the base of everything, which is your rates that you would charge, are up to snuff. So I'm really glad that we are talking about this one today. For us today, hi, I'm Sophia Wilson, Manager of Customer Experience here at Function Point. I'm sure a lot of you have heard my voice in the past. I hope you don't mind listening to it for a little bit longer today. But I am joined by my colleague, Jess Bird. I'm sure a lot of you are also very familiar with her as well. Just quickly checking in, Jess, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, great. So guys, Jess will be answering questions as we go through today. As you all know, there is the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to type anything in there. We did have some technical difficulties a couple weeks ago on the questions panel. So if anyone wants to just shoot a quick hello to Jess to make sure that she's getting it, that would be fantastic. I want to make sure your questions are answered as we go through. But of course, just so everyone knows, this webinar is being recorded. We will be sending a follow-up email with this in there, as well as some other resources on topics that we talk about today. And then, of course, if there are any questions that you feel like you come up with tonight after the webinar and you're like, oh, shoot, I wish I had had an answer to that, feel free to email success@functionpoint.com, where one of us will be able to help you find the best solution for you and your team. So our agenda
We are good
today.
to go from the questions. Sorry,
Great.
I just wanted to say we're good to go.
Good, I'm glad to hear it. I feel like we have PTSD from that a couple of weeks ago, so I just really want to check it.
We did.
Awesome, great. So our agenda today, guys, we're going to talk about a few things. So billable versus non-billable and how we can organize those within the system. This is a huge question and it can really affect your utilization, your efficiency reports, everything along those lines. So let's make sure that we talk about this, and I'm going to do the separate definitions for you. Following that, I'm going to talk about different ways that we can actually set up your different rate cards within the system. And this can go from a staff level, a service level, and actually a role rate level. We're going to go through those definitions as well, and then I'm going to show you how we can set that all up in the system too. And then what we also have the capabilities of doing is cost rates within the system. So your individual costs, you want to be able to see what that profitability is for yourselves. This really, again, helps with some of those profit analysis reports. So let's make sure that we also talk about those. Then we're going to talk about just different ways that I have seen projects designed based off of different rates and rate cards. I have my system set up in one specific way, but we're also going to talk broadly about other ways that I've seen other agencies set them up too, since that tends to be a very commonly asked question. So let's start with our first item, billable versus non-billable. So if we're going high level with this, billable, it would be any kind of dollar amount that you would plan or hope to bill a client for. When it comes to the system itself, you do need to have a dollar amount in your rate cards for the system to consider it a billable item. Now, there are different levels as well where we can look at, say, a billable job and have non-billable items within it. But there's only a couple reports that will pull through to for you to be able to see the difference. Where the non-billable service, it's usually, we would define this as internal work, or it would be any item that you maybe don't plan on invoicing for. So the way the system works with this is that anything with a $0 rate against it would be considered a non-billable item in your system. There is no way of having a line item or a service have a dollar amount and then allow you to consider it as non-billable. It has to have $0 against it to be considered a $0 line item. Now, again, coming back to that sort of talk around different jobs, there is the ability of labeling a specific job as billable or non-billable, and then you can still have the services that you would choose to have living against those jobs as well, so that you would be able to see what the potential of those billing dollar amounts would be against, say, a non-billable job. Normally a non-billable job would be anything that you would be doing for your agency, including, say, internal meetings, maybe if you're updating your own website and wanting to see what you maybe could have charged a client if you had been doing that project for a client. You would want some billable services against that. Most cases, though, I do see any internal work would be by using, say, an in-house rate card that would all be just $0 against it. So again, we will jump into the system and I will show you some of these different options, but high level, again, billable, you got to have a dollar amount in the system, non-billable, $0 rate against it. So that is the easiest way for you to be able to think of billable versus non-billable in regards to services and time tracking within Function Point. Now this one can be pretty complicated, Jess. Any immediate questions kind of coming through that you feel like maybe need some more clarification on screen?
Nope, everybody is obviously paying close attention, and you've obviously explained that very well.
Okay, great. I'd love to hear that. So talking about different rate types in the system. So there's 3 different ways that we can set up individual to service rates in here. So we've got our service rate. So this would be rates that would be based on your company services that you would provide. So we do have many different types of agencies that work for us. But if we were to go kind of with a standard creative for a service rate, say for design, communication, these would be separate services that you would have a specific dollar amount that you would expect to be able to charge for. This could be anything from a standard kind of $100 an hour to $210 if that's what you charge. I definitely see rates that are all over the map when it comes to this, but it would be the service of design that you would plan on charging a specific rate for. Then if we go into something a little more complicated, so say you're maybe a bit more of a larger agency, and depending on the individual that would actually be providing that service of, say, design, you may have different bill out rates for them. So you do have the ability in Function Point to actually then go into staff rates. So the rates for an individual staff dependent on service and bill out potential. So again, this would be, say, that design service, normally we would charge out at, say, $125 an hour for this if it were maybe like a blended or standard rate. However, we're going to have Jess actually working on this rate, on this service of design for a specific job, and Jess's bill out rate is $150 an hour. So we would actually be able to track based on the 125 that maybe we estimated an hour for a specific job. But since Jess tracked time to that service, you can see that at the 150 an hour, the way that your financials will differ and grow on that job as you go through. So this is also very handy for in cases where maybe we have some more senior level people to junior level people and different bill out rates. So that, again, you can see those differences and we can build those out into the system, which is really great. Something I do always like to say is the staff rates will override the service rates. So that is also really key. If there is somebody that is going to be having the exact same bill out rate as what your services are, we'll just want to leave it blank. But again, we're going to jump into the system and I will show you this shortly as well. Next up is roll rates. Now, roll rates can kind of be a little bit funny in function point, but ultimately it's the same as a staff rate, except you would be assigning specific bill out rates based on what those roles are that you have in your system, and of course, potential seniority that might be with those roles. Something I very commonly see, again, if we're going to stick with that design service line and the individuals that may be connected to it, it could be a senior versus a junior designer. And again, similar situation where we have the junior designer may be billing out at 125 an hour, and your senior designer that would bill out at 200 an hour. And we can actually differentiate between those different rates on the estimate itself too, which if you know that, say the client that you're working with has a specific request, maybe a specific designer they prefer to work with, you could even estimate out. It's like, okay, if you want Jess to be working on this job, I'm going to put in 5 hours here. Her rate is $200 an hour, so that you can also account for that, so that you're not losing any potential income because they've requested somebody more senior. You can actually show them like, okay, if you want to have this specific individual, it does charge out more at this rate. So the roll rates card, which again, I will show you in the system when we get there, it is only for estimating purposes, but I do have just a nice little trick that I can show you so that we can push it to the individuals for when they're tracking time. It will still pull those bill out rates for you at that individual level. All right, great. Again, Jess, just doing a quick check-in. Any questions on this before we continue to rate cards?
We just have one saying, with roll rates, can the same person bill at different rates?
Unfortunately,
example, front-end developer. Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately not. Right now, an individual will only have a single role. Now, there are ways that we can manipulate this depending on the service, because we can override an individual for each service as well, which I will show when we get into the system too. So there is some capability for some manipulation around scenarios like that. Okay, great. Next, we're coming into cost rates. So again, this is that extra layer. And this is something I'm actually surprised sometimes at how few agencies want to input this into function point. First of all, I'm going to let you know right now, if you put this in, we can manipulate all of the permissions to make sure that only you can see cost rates, or anyone sort of within your leadership or executive teams that would need to be looking at profitability. But this is really, really handy for as people are tracking their time, you can see what their individual hourly salary is, so that you can take into account, again, what that little profit margin is between, again, what the costs are to you and what you're invoicing for. So I am a huge advocate for putting these in. A lot of people don't believe me that we can manipulate those permissions, but I promise you we can. So I can definitely show you that quickly today as well, so we can make sure that we touch on it if we have some extra time, but I know I'm already taking up quite a bit already. So again, there's two different ways we can do cost rates within function point. We've got the individual staff rates, so we can actually show what their bill out rate is. So again, if I continue to use Jess, sorry, cost rate is, not bill out rate. So if I continue to use Jess as an example, her individually maybe will show that she has $45 is what her cost rate would be, but her bill out rate again is at that $200 an hour. So when we're looking at jobs and what the different costs are associated to it, we can look and view that through a profit analysis report. So very handy. When it comes to the staff rates, we do recommend having this be what the individual's hourly salary is, as well as with a percentage of your overhead. Now, obviously, a lot of your cost reports you're probably going to be pulling from your full accounting tool that you have for more accurate, but this is why we recommend putting in a percentage of that overhead so that you have an idea, again, of what some of the additional costs that you have are outside of just the staff salary. Next up, we have an estimate cost rate card. So this is an area where you can put in just a standard blended cost for yourself, which will help you at the estimating level to see, again, what that potential profit margin may be, so that you are prepared for the end of the job. Again, if you're estimating properly, in most cases, your actuals should line up pretty close to your estimate. And if they don't, that is where you're gonna have that capability of viewing and understanding where there may be holes in your business. So again, estimating is really important, and you can set up a specific cost rate card so that on your estimates you can see again what the potential costs are associated with that. So I also highly recommend setting that up, and I will show you where that lives today as well. Next, we come into project planning, and this was something that I've really been thinking a lot over the last couple of days. And this is, again, different ways that I have seen customers organize rate cards. So this, and again, if maybe you have something unique and a bit special, please reach out to the success team. We're happy to help you come up with the best solution for yourself. But these are some of the top ones that I've seen. So a standard blended rate. So this would be $100 that maybe would be spread across an entire list of services that you may have. So that is probably one of the most common ways that I see rate cards organized. Another one would be based on services provided. So again, when I jump in the system, I'm going to show you how something like that is set up. And ultimately what this is when you are looking at the rate cards themselves, you can do specific rates for different services. So again, kind of coming back to that question around, say, an individual that may work on like senior development and maybe QA and would have different rates for each of those, we can manipulate that so that it would be different bill out rates for each of those. So again, I will show you that. And then another one is company agreements. And this I see with some agencies. If you have specific agreements on rates that you're going to charge out to your clients, what you can do is you can actually create a specific rate card for that client yourself. So that you can make sure anytime you're doing work for them, you would choose that rate card. It would auto-populate for you so that you're not needing to do it every single time. And it would be available to you anytime you're working with that group. Now, I don't see this one commonly used anymore, and I really actually don't overly recommend it. Just because of functionality in the system as well. I have worked with some agencies that maybe have like 20 rate cards going because they have different agreements with each client that they have, which of course it does cause a little bit of lag when we're manipulating this certain page in the system, but also it does make some things confusing for you. You know, when it comes to a lot of your financial reporting later, it would be a lot easier if you were able to have a single blended rate that you would be able to work with different agencies for, and you know, help to standardize your process. But again, I know that some people have a lot of like really great older clients that they've been working with, and they want to keep those sort of grandfathered agreements in place for them. So I can understand why maybe a couple of extra ones for agreements like that can really help. But for organizational purposes, I am a huge fan of the less the better. It will make things easier for you. All right, now before I wrap up the slides, and I do apologize, I've talked longer than I would have liked to through these, Jess, any specific questions? Or I'm sure a lot of them are probably things we want to tackle when I open up the system itself.
Yeah, you're good so far, hun.
Okay, great. Again, Jess is answering questions in the back. If you have any questions later after the webinar is done, email success@functionpoint.com. Do not hesitate to reach out to us. We want to make sure you're successful in the system. So I'm going to jump into Function Point. Now, the first thing that I really wanted to touch on today is, of course, how you go about actually assigning these rate cards to your individual estimates. And most of you, if you have been using Function Point for a while, you know the add estimate and this rate category drop down here. Now this is a required drop down within your system, but this is where you're going to see all the different rate cards available to you. And this is where you'd be able to add them against any estimate. Now, if you are ever looking at an estimate, you will want to make sure that you navigate to the basic info page, and you will always be able to see what that rate category is. You can also edit this and change it, and it will update any of your service rates for you too as you go through. So if, say, halfway through the year, you're updating your rates, your client knows about it, you would be able to come in here, update this, and actually update it to a specific date as well, so that maybe some of the older work you would want to leave at the lower rate because of maybe the time that it was used. And this will trickle through to all of your timesheets later on as well. Now, to go in and actually build these rates, this is when you would come up to admin for yourself and rate and staff management. This is where a lot of those different rate items live. Now, to go ahead and create the different rate categories, so in that drop down, you had seen the client standard rate, the higher rate, and the discount rate. This is where you can come in and create any of the different rate categories that you may need. So we already have in here 4 different rates. Again, client standard rate, where the default is $100 an hour, the higher rate where it's $120 an hour, and the discount rate at $75 an hour. Again, this is something that I have set up in here because it is very commonly seen. You know, your standard rate, pretty self-explanatory. Higher rate, maybe they're putting, maybe they're a high use client, you know that they're going to be a bit more stressful for you. You usually charge them out a slightly higher, knowing the amount of time and resources that they're going to use for you and your team. And then of course the discount rate, which maybe say you're working with a nonprofit and you wanted to provide them with a little bit of a discount, or again, you've worked with them for a really long time and they're really enjoyable to work with and usually pretty easy. So you like to provide them with maybe a grandfathered rate that you'd still have. And then of course the cost rate as well. Now this is pretty standard to go through. Maybe we will go ahead and create a new one. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a house rate. And this is something that I get asked pretty commonly by different clients. It's like, I actually just want a single rate that would be $0 so I can make sure that that I can apply this to all of my internal work. I'd be able to put in, say, $1 an hour is what we're going to charge at this, so that you can kind of see what's going to come in. And of course, that markup percent we will keep at 0. Go ahead and save that. Oh, right, we can't have any zeros in here. So 0.20, we'll save that. And that will now be active. Now, again, this is a pretty simple list that we're seeing. There is the next page, which is, I find for myself, the simplest way of actually being able to view things. And so this is admin, rate and staff management, service rates and markups. And this is where you're actually going to see each and every single one of the individual rate cards that you have with those services. So by default, it has come in and has put in the $100 an hour that we would say be doing for the standard client rate here. Now this is coming back to that question of, okay, so say I have different rates per service. We would actually be able to change these up here now. So say, you know, client meetings, we actually don't charge out for this. This is actually going to be a non-billable service for us. This is where we'd want to do a little bit of manipulation to make sure that we are zeroing this out. And this is important to take note of. So say something like errand here that we have, you're going to see that it is $0 across the board for everything here, which ultimately is telling you that this is a non-billable service for you, because you always plan on billing out at $0 an hour for it. Which is going to, again, pull through to a lot of those efficiency and utilization reports later. Now, you do need to make sure you come in here and override this. So you can see with this non-billable rate, or this house rate that I had created here at $1 an hour, it did automatically just drop $1 into every single item. So if you are ever adding in new rate cards, you need to make sure that you come in and any of your non-billable items, you put in $0 for this, so that you can make sure that it is not going to bill out accidentally at your default rate. And again, different items, if you needed to update certain pieces to different rates, we can do this. So maybe pre-production is $100 an hour, but production itself is going to be $125. You can come in, you can make these changes in here. Just make sure you scroll all the way to the bottom and click save after. Now, if you are making changes, you are going to see this save and reapply internal service rates to all open jobs. I would just please ask, make sure that you are allowed to update all jobs before you click this button, because once you do, it will automatically change everything and we cannot revert your system back. So if it's, say, only one specific or a couple of specific jobs, you just want to make sure you navigate back to that original estimate to update that rate card for it specifically, rather than for all of them. But if you know that, say, starting Jan 1, all of your jobs are at a new rate, you can click this button, make sure that you update that on all of your currently open jobs, and it does make it quite easy for you. Something else I always like to point out too is this expenses section, external expenses section. Any of these rates in here, of course, are a % markup. You do need to make sure you put in the 0.2 for 20% or 0.15 for 15%. I have seen this before where someone has put in 15 and the system automatically thinks this is a 1500% markup. So please make sure that you do not do that. It will cause some headaches later on for yourself. Just go ahead and save that. And this is again where you will see absolutely everything listed here. You will notice some grayed out areas. These are just inactive services that you have. My demo system, of course, has been active for a very long time, which is why there's lots in there. You probably won't have as many yourself, but none of these can be deleted because of their connection that they would have to historical data in your system. The system does have safeties like that set up so that you don't need to worry about any of those sorts of things affecting your historical data. Okay, so again, these are individual service rates. You can update, manipulate on this page. You will see all of them here. If you do have a lot, again, I've worked with some agencies that maybe have 20 and you got to scroll a bunch to be able to view them all. But this is probably one of the cleanest ways that you can see some of this set up. Now, before I go into the individual staff rates, again, Jess, I just want to do a quick check-in. Any questions so far or anything you feel I've missed while talking about this page?
No, the questions that are coming in are pretty straightforward, but no, you're basically covering everything. I would just reiterate though that the more rate cards you create, when you do introduce new services, new expenses, things like that, a lot of people will forget to update and it can cause a bit of a yard sale. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about creating rate cards in the system.
Definitely, yes. It's, you know, I actually had an agency that I work with quite regularly, but they've been with the system for a few years and like, Sophia, like some things aren't lining up right now. I'm like, oh my goodness, we haven't talked about like this since the start of your onboarding. So it's something that I recommend doing at least like once a year. Come in, make sure everything is still clean. We can make it's almost like the similar practices closing your books in your accounting tool, right? Let's come in here, make sure everything in here is accurate as well, so that you can start the year off super fresh. Now, going into the next bit, this is now where we're going to start talking about individual staff. And again, for some of these items, like maybe design, and you would bill out at different rates for your staff, not necessarily per rate card per service. So you are going to see this manage staff rates button up here, which I'm now going to click on. And ultimately, this looks the exact same as that past page that you just had, except for the fact that now we have this extra layer. So again, if we're continuing to use design as our example, with this client standard rate at $100, you're still going to be able to see what that service rate was. Now, what I'm going to show you is actually Bobby here. You know, Bobby does bill out at a little bit higher than say everyone else. We've got design here. He would bill out at 150 an hour. So anytime Bobby would track time against the service line of design, it will actually pull through on his timesheet as 150 an hour rather than that 100, because it will override it for you. Now, again, we want to come back and continue talking about keeping this clean though. So if there are cases where there's something that you know he's going to continue to bill out at the same amount as the service line here, just leave this box blank. The number of times I've come in and people are like, no, I just zeroed it out so that it would go to whatever the service line is. It's going to read this as 0 and now make this email template service as a non-billable item if he were to track time against it. This 0 will override this 100. So if you want to make sure that for this email template, he bills out at that 100, leave it blank so that the system will look here first to see if there's a rate against it. And if there isn't, then it will go into what the service rate is. So please, please, please be careful with that. The number of times that I've had to go in and actually clean up a system from something like that happening is very common. So we do try to make things easy by allowing you to override an entire rate. So again, say if we had this house rate, I know for Bobby, maybe he bills out even at, maybe I'll continue with the 150. I can go ahead and click apply rate and it will fill every single one in. But again, go ahead, do that little quick cleanup here for anything that we know is $0, so that it, again, will read that service rate rather than the staff rate in here. But again, this is really handy if you know, again, so coming back to that topic there around the senior engineer versus say QA, and we know Jess would bill out at different amounts for that. I don't think I actually have those services in here, so those weren't the best examples to use. But say, for example, design, we know she bills out at 150 an hour. We can go in here and manipulate this so that for design, she would bill out at 150 an hour, and maybe at code testing, she would actually bill out at 200. So again, the system will read this item here first before the service. So if you needed to make sure that for different services that they would work on, you can go ahead and again, manipulate those services per individual. Now I know that the question itself was more around those role rates and if someone could be assigned to multiple roles. Normally what I would recommend as a best practice in those cases is actually to just assign what their primary role is as their role. But again, manipulate the services so that you can make sure that they are billing out at the amount that you would want them to bill out at. Okay, great. Any questions, Jess, before I jump into role rates?
Nope, we're good.
Okay, great, awesome. So next up is those role rates. So as I had sort of mentioned before, again, this can be a little bit confusing because the page I'm about to show you is really only valid for estimates themselves. So again, coming in the same flow, admin, rate and staff management, we're gonna click into role rates. Any roles that you have set up through your list maintenance are going to be available here. And then again, you're going to see those different rate cards that you already had preset up here for yourself with the individual standard rates that you would apply for that. Now this page itself, again, only for estimates. When you're building out an estimate and say you are estimating for a specific service, you can continue to develop that down to that next level of the different roles. I will navigate back to an estimate shortly to show you again how on an estimate you can do a little bit of that manipulation down to the role, individual, and even show some costs on there too. So don't worry, I will show you that. Now this again, so for designer, we would bill it at 140, web developer 100, and then, so again, when you're estimating that will show. Now, if for these, your different staff have these roles assigned to them as well in the back end, you can do this save and carry over to all staff. So this button will carry these rates over to each of the individuals on that page we were just on. So again, really handy so that with your actuals, you can make sure that their role rates are what their bill out rates would be. For any actuals, it does need to be on that staff rate page. But if you are going to click this button, totally encourage you to do it. If these are the rates you want them to do it at, just please make sure that once you have clicked this, you click back into the manage staff rates and update those non-billable items or any other items that maybe need to be changed, because this will override it completely for that entire page again. So please just make sure that you are just reviewing each page to make sure everything is accurate and up to date after doing something like that. Okay, great. Next items I want to go to is cost rates. Again, sorry, Jess, I know I just asked. Any questions, anything else you want to make sure that I touch on before we navigate to the next bit?
Oh, you're doing great. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So next up is cost rates. So again, this is hugely important to give you that extra layer. Now, there are two ways of having the different cost rates in your system. First is for estimating purposes. So I'm going to do that first, just because we've already sort of been looking at it so far. Through your service rates and markups, you'll probably all notice this Z cost rate card, which is a cost rate here. Now this, we do recommend just being a blended rate, keep it general. You know, just off the bat, we did a $30 cost rate here. This is just to give you an idea of what those the individual potential costs could be while you're building out estimates. Of course, it probably will change a little bit because we do have a way of also inputting what each individual's cost is as well, which will then pull through to the actuals themselves. To go ahead and build this, that is in that rate categories section again too. So when you're in rate categories, when we look at this cost rate card, what you're going to see is this cost rate markup here. So make this my cost rate card. Just make sure that this is checked so that you can make sure that this pulls through for every single estimate. I have run into this before where someone does not check this. So therefore they feel like they think they need to choose that as their rate card every time they're building an estimate. But then of course that is your billing rate that I had showed you on that ad page before. So your cost rate, just please make sure this is checked so that it will pull through as well as what your billing rate is. So for this, and I'm just going to navigate to a different estimate that I have already set up here. Underneath services, when you have that cost rate card actually built out, that is when this cost column is going to appear on here for you. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this page. It's normally just quantity, rate, override, and total for yourself as you are building out these different estimates. But if you add in that cost rate card, it will then pull in this cost item here so that you can start seeing what those differences are. So say for something like research, I'm just going to collapse this for now. For say something like research, you know, at the 27 hours, 120 an hour, but we have an override here of $3,240 is what we're planning on charging it for. We do see that an estimated cost is going to be just over $1,000 for you, so that you can start seeing those differences. And a lot of that will actually pull through to this view cost, billable, and margins button here too, which will give you that little overview of internal services, internal expenses, and the external expenses, and the breakdown for you. So again, you can start to see what those margins will be. So definitely highly recommend this. It is a great sort of predictor for you so that you are not completely thrown off guard when you are looking at costs later on. Now coming into the different items here as well, I do have this line item broken out by each individual. So I'm going to go ahead and, oh, I can't revise this. Oh, I can't. Just going to make it so that it's in an editable mode for you. So in here, we have the different individuals so that we can actually break it out based off the individual and estimate at this level. But if you wanted the different roles, we could put in, you know, for a specific web developer and it will update for you as well based on those rates. Or if you needed to add another one in, it's just along these line items here. You can go in and add in this individual staff role, and I will put in designer. You will see actually that rate updated for you based off that role rate that had been in there. Maybe we know there's going to be 5 hours, and it will automatically calculate for you. So again, these rates, having these role rates put in here, especially if you're using junior and senior sort of levels is where I most commonly see it used, is a great way for you to be able to break out what those different rates are for yourself. And then of course, once any of this has been saved, since I had to create a revision, it's asking me just to approve it again. Revisions are great as well, but we talk about that more in our estimating webinar. Click submit. And again, you will start to see those costs growing for yourself. So the designer here, again, let's remember I had the $30 as the blended cost rate for estimating purposes. So our potential cost here is $150, where we plan on billing out at $1,000. So it's, again, you can start to see those differences. Great. Now going into the actual individual costs. So this, of course, is for estimating. Now, what most people are mostly interested in is for each individual, so that when they are tracking time, you can see the differences of the billable versus what their costs are, even on timesheets. And for updating individuals, it's actually pretty easy. Again, under rate and staff management, staff rates and permissions. And this is where you will have a list of all of the different staff that you have in your system. If you click into the individual specifically, I will use Bobby here as our example still. And this is where you're going to have these abilities of putting in just some added data to them. So you're going to see your hourly cost and that 120 an hour that maybe Bobby would cost your agency to be tracking time. So you can put this in at each individual. So that is going to calculate for you. And again, you'll see maybe Bobby's not the most profitable person because he costs you a lot, but only billed out at that 150 on that standard rate. So something else important to take note of. Now, something I do always like to point out as well is, again, merit increases, cost of living will change throughout the year. If, say, you're updating it in March for backdating to Jan 1 when, say, a raise maybe came into play, as you're updating this, there is this update timesheet cost as well up here. So you can actually click into this and it will allow you to, say, backdate it to Jan 1 so that all of those timesheets will pull through the proper cost rate for you as well. Okay, fantastic. So that is a lot on cost rate. Jess, I'm just wanting to do another check-in. Any questions that you think would be valuable, or again, anything you feel like I've missed that I should touch on?
Do you think we could just show in that help document where we have that basic calculation of how people come up with that cost rate?
Definitely. I'm actually going to make sure that that document is sent out with our follow-up email today. But for anyone interested, obviously we have the question mark up in our top right corner here with our help center. And in here, if you were to just come in to even just the search and put in cost, you're going to see the setting individual staff costs and creating cost rate cards. So this will be the document I will be sending out with our follow-up email. But this is how it's super easy to come in and find if, say, you're eager and not wanting to wait for that follow-up email today. Okay, great. So that was really everything I wanted to make sure that I touched on today. Maybe again, Jess, any other questions that you think would be really valuable to make sure that we touch about on screen at all?
No, I think it's great. And like Sophie said, if you have any questions, you can just reach out. If you know who your CSM is, obviously you can reach out directly to them. Otherwise, just hit the success box and one of us will get back to you as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Sometimes reaching out to the success box can be really handy because we're always monitoring it. And if, say, someone's on a call, there is a different individual that would be able to help you with, say, some of the quicker questions like this that don't know your workflow fully. So it's really handy. But with that, we'll end this at quarter to the top of the hour. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, we have recorded the webinar. We will be sending the follow-up email with that, as well as a couple of other resources in the next couple of days. So if there's anyone that maybe you wish had joined, please feel free to share the recording with them. And yeah, any questions, send it to success@functionpoint.com, and we will stay online just for a couple more minutes to make sure that all of your questions that are maybe still trickling through are answered before the top of the hour. But yeah, again, thank you everyone for joining us today. It's always a pleasure. We do have another webinar coming up in a couple of weeks where we're going to talk about our BI reporting. Jimmy Woo is actually going to be joining me for that one. But yeah, I hope to see you all there. Other than that, happy Wednesday, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks again, Jess, for joining me as well.
Happy to do it.